Hello everyone, it is me, Ben from Ben by the Books. I know I look a little bit different. My hair is completely cut short. It was that time I had to get rid of it. But welcome back. My name is Ben from Ben by the Books, where we look at the good, the bad, the ugly, and should you even buy this book. We are here. It is the end of April, and this is going to be our new version format. We're going to do one video a month because my life is super busy, and we're just going to talk about all the books that I read for the month. With that being said, if you want more of this stuff, you have to subscribe. Make sure you share and leave a like, maybe a comment or two or three. I do take the time to read all that stuff. But today we're going to talk about 4 different books that I read towards the end of April, which were 3 Dean Koontz novels and then True Faith and Allegiance, which is technically written by Tom Clancy, but it's written by somebody else. So today we're going to be talking about what I would like to call True Faith and Dean Koontz. So again, if you want more of this stuff, don't forget to subscribe. So we're going to go over the Dean Koontz books first, and then we're going to get into the True Faith and Allegiance, which is written by Mike Madden, but technically Tom Clancy's book. So the Dean Koontz books, I've said before that Dean Koontz is one of my favorite authors. I have a good amount of his books, and none of his books disappoint me. Which is very good. And these 3 that we're going to be talking about were from his earlier years, around the mid-70s or so. So I was very interested into reading them because these are some of his beginning novels. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the first one of these, which is called The Vision. The Vision. Now, since when some of these are so old, this isn't the original version. This is a republished, a newer, updated version of this one. So a lot of his older ones have been republished and updated and refreshed for sale. And also some of these stories were actually written by, not just by him, but him under different names. So again, when he was first starting out, he wrote these stories under some of his different names, and then he just redid them. But this one is the first one. It's called The Vision. This was about a woman by the name of Mary Bergen, and she has the ability to see murders, but she doesn't necessarily have the ability to stop the murders from happening. So this was a story about her, about how she works with different police departments, and she helps them kind of solve all these murders. And as the story goes on, there's a murder that's going to happen in her town, and she's racing against clock to stop the murder. But as she's trying to stop the main murderer, the murderer is still murdering other people. So it's like a cat and mouse type of game. It's a very interesting concept about how some people are able to see things and they're not able to stop them right away. This is another subject that is explored in some of the other some of the other stories. I think in one of my most recent ones that I read was called Nest. This is kind of like the same, not idea, but some subject matter is kind of roughly the same. The good about this one is the characters are really good. So Mary is obviously the main character, and then her brother is one of the other main characters in the story, and then another good friend of his, Mary's husband is also a good friend of hers, another main character. But some of the other characters are kind of wishy-washy. There's a lot of flashbacks to when Mary was younger, about how this particular person, raped her when she was 6 or 9 or whatever, however old she was. And that kind of plays into the murder. The final climactic sequence at the end, the twist at the end was really gripping. I didn't really expect the twist at the end. And it was just a very good, solid, short little book called The Vision. The good about this is it goes by quick. Technically, this story only lasts over a period of about, I think, 4 or 5 days, so it doesn't last very long. I like the flashbacks here and there. I like how it flows. I would say the bad of this one is not that the twist was still surprising. I mean, it kind of was, but you just kind of feel as you're reading through this one, you can kind of guess towards the end. I don't really want to spoil in case you end up reading it, but you can kind of guess towards the end who the main murderer is, and then the final climactic sequence is still really good to read, and it's very gripping. So I guess that was the bad. It's kind of given away towards the end. It's basically using a process of elimination. You already figure out who's the bad guy and who's not, and that was kind of bad. The ugly, I wouldn't say there's typically anything ugly with this one, but should you buy it? Yes, if you're interested in older versions or older stories of authors who are kind of established and still writing. Dean Koontz is still writing stuff, but if you want, some of his beginning work, you should definitely get it. Again, this is published by Headline, so they do a lot of the reissuing or the updating of some of these older stories. So I liked this one. This one on my Goodreads I gave 4 stars, so I liked that one a heck of a lot. Next one we're going to talk about is Shattered. So again, another one of these older stories that was updated. This one didn't take me very, very long. It was actually really, really quick, really short. This one was about a man by the name of Alex who is driving across the country to meet his fiance by the name of Courtney, and with Alex is Courtney's brother Colin, and it's basically just about the two of them driving across the country, which you would think is just a normal story, but again, there's a man that is following them throughout the entire story. So it's a guy in a van, and he's somewhat connected to Courtney. He still fantasizes about Courtney. All he thinks about is Courtney. I can't remember what his name was. Maybe I can find it. Oh, his name is George. And I guess him and Courtney were married at one point, and then they split off, and Courtney went with Alex. And now George is out for revenge, and he's just kind of driving. But George has this type of psychological power, so he knows who he's going after, and he knows who to find. So it's basically about Alex and Colin in one car, in a sporty car, and then there's this van that's following them the whole way across the country, from one end of the country to California, I believe. So they're just driving and driving and driving, and it gets really, it's not so much a scary story, but it's more of a suspense story. It really holds you to the end. The last climactic sequence between Alex and George is really, really good. And I got really mad at this one because it just kind of ends, and I don't understand why it just kind of ends. It just stops, and it's very, very annoying. And it's kind of, you're kind of left to assume that obviously George is gone, but you kind of assume that it's just, Alex and Courtney and Colin, and they just kind of live happily ever after at the end, and nothing is really resolved. So I would say, I know I'm going a little bit out of order, but I would say that's like the bad part of this book, is it just kind of ends, and you're not really given a great conclusion, but you can just kind of assume by putting all of the plot points together that everyone lives happily ever after, evil's been defeated. And that's one of the main themes that are in all of Dean Koontz's books, is that no matter how evil it is, good always triumphs over evil, and that's what I love reading some of these stories. The good about this one is it was just entertaining to read. It's not a very long read either. It's a little over 200 pages. It took me, I think, a day to read. It doesn't take very long to read some of these older stories because they're shorter. So that was the good part of this one. Again, this story kept me gripped till the very end. So that's why I was able to finish it in a day. There's no real uglies in this, other than the ending was just kind of eh. But if you can get past the ending and appreciate everything else, it's still good. This kind of reminded me of reading Christine by Stephen King, where the car just kind of follows you around. This was something similar to that, except, the car wasn't driving itself. It was driven by a psycho that's able to see things in his mind. So I liked that one a lot. This one I also gave another 4-star book. I just generally liked it in general. Then we're moving on to the next one that's by Dean Koontz in this little collection I have, which is called Night Chills, again published by Headline. And again, this is one of his older stories. Going into this one, I was not, how do I put this? How do I put this in a delicate way? It's not that I didn't like this one, I just thought there were some parts of it that were really good, and then there's some parts that are just kind of eh. So it kind of reminded me of reading Cujo by Stephen King. Like, if you've never read it, I definitely agree you should read it. I might have to make a video about that one. But anyways, when I was reading Cujo, to tie this back into this Night Chills one, when I was reading Cujo, the parts about the dog were amazing, and then the other parts that were about the humans weren't so amazing. And that's what I kind of got with this Night Chills one. The premise of this one is a group, a man, a woman, and his child, and their two best friends are in this town in Maine, and they're on vacation. And what happens is these government scientists, they set up the town to do an experiment, which is called the lock and key experiment. It basically means you kind of go up to them and say, I'm the lock, they are the key, and you basically say to the person whatever you want, and they just kind of do it. So this group of scientists were making people do things. Like, for example, they made this one guy drive 100 miles an hour, and he just slammed right into a wall. They made this other woman take off all her clothes and do whatever she was told to do. There was another woman where she was at a restaurant and she was told to pin her hand to a cutting board and start chopping her hand up. So this is a very dangerous mind control experiment, and he also explores this idea of like mind control and making people do things. Also ties into another Dean Koontz book that I read last year, which is called False Memory, which is another great book. I might have to do a video on just some of the Dean Koontz ones that I've read, but it kind of falls into that category of implanting memories and telling people, hey, I need you to do this, and telling people what to do. So it's about this family that's in this town in Maine, and they are trying to get out of the town because they figured out that one of the members in the town committed a murder, so they're trying to get the help, but they realize that the entire town is controlled by the scientists. So they basically manufactured this town that has all these people that are doing what they tell them to do. So you have, police officers setting up roadblocks and basically interrogating people and manipulating the weather and manipulating how things are in the town. So it's very, very interesting. So that was the good parts about this is just the mind control aspect, and obviously good defeats evil. Obviously the good guys figure out how to do the mind control, and they set up basically the town against the scientists, and really cool how it all ends. I really liked it. I have to say this one was a little bit longer, on the longer side. It was about 400-ish pages, so it took me at least a week or two to finish reading this one. It was a lot. It was a lot of work. I wouldn't say that's necessarily a bad thing. I like the longer stuff, but I was just kind of shocked about how long this was. The bad stuff about this, I feel that when he's talking about the town and the main characters, that's where I'm really invested in. When he's talking about the scientists and how they managed to do this, there's a lot of flashbacks here and there. So you'll get a section about the town, and then there'll be a flashback, then a section about the town, a flashback. So it kind of goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I get that to understand where this is coming from, but sometimes I just felt it just wasn't necessary. And it just was really kind of weird. Also, the main guys, the main scientists, evil scientist guys, are kind of like perverted, and they love the lock and key stuff, especially when they're using the lock and key mechanisms on women and making women do whatever they want. So that was kind of not really good to read. I didn't really like that part about it. It was kind of like mind slavery. I'm not really into that. I'm into the idea of mind control, but just not into doing that, and to go into fantasies and stuff like that. This is not what I wanted to read, but I continued to read anyways. The ending was really good. Everything's all resolved, and it's kind of doesn't just end. It's not like the Shattered story where it just kind of ends. This one is more of a concrete ending. Everything is resolved. Good is defeated. Evil is conquered, and it's just a great story. And I just love how the main characters are able to conquer evil and then use that evil for good. Because a lot of times we talk about how books are always conquering evil, and then that's kind of it. They don't use it for their own good. So I liked that. There's no uglier parts. I guess you could say there was one ugly part of this book, which is basically just one of the main scientist characters just using women as a slave all the time, and that was kind of not really good to read, and it's kind of graphic, kind of goes into the 50 Shades of Grey type of area for a little bit, basically like 50 Shades of Grey but in the 70s, so a lot more expletives and stuff like that, stuff that I wasn't really a fan of, but I continued to read it anyways because I knew that there was more to come. Would I read this one again? Probably. I gave this one 4 stars. All these Dean Koontz ones I gave 4 stars because I just generally enjoy them. And I like Dean Koontz in general, so I'm always going to give Dean Koontz books the best review. I've never been disappointed with a Dean Koontz book, even though I have some of the criticisms for the ones that we just went through. I don't have any particular hatred towards reading Dean Koontz novels. If I had the chance to get a Dean Koontz novel at a Barnes & Noble or a Target or any other bookstore, I grab that opportunity and I take advantage of that. But moving on from Dean Koontz, we're going to be going into one of the books that I took a long time to read, which again belongs to a lot of these collections of hardcover books that I got from the Christmas Tree Shop. This one right here, True Faith and Allegiance. So this is a Tom Clancy novel, but it's not written by him because unfortunately he's passed away. But this is by Mark Greene. I thought it was Mike Madden, but it's Mark Greene. He's the guy that writes the Gray Man series. I have a couple of those, but I haven't decided to read them yet. They're on my shelf somewhere. But this one is a Jack Ryan novel. So again, some of these Tom Clancy ones that are written by other people are part of the post-Tom Clancy era, I guess you would say. The post-Tom Clancy era of Jack Ryan stories and Jack Ryan Jr. stories. So we're going to get into this one. This one took me a long time to read, as you can see by the sheer size of this. This was a whopping 742 pages. Took me the rest of this last month to read this book because it's just so massive. And normally I don't like to read these really big ones, but the reviews on this one looked generally pretty well and are pretty good, and I wanted to read it. And so I did. So let's get into True Faith and Allegiance. So this one is about how Jack Ryan is obviously the president in this. So somewhere along the line, I haven't really figured out when he becomes the president of the United States in this fictionalized version of the United States. But somewhere along the line, if you read all Tom Clancy novels in order, Jack Ryan eventually becomes the president, and then his son, Jack Ryan Jr., gets more involved in whatever his dad is doing. So this story revolved around a massive data breach, and it involved a data breach of high-profile members of the Navy, the Army, Coast Guard, what have you. And it all tied back to this one particular person who found the data breach and was sending it everywhere. So he was sending it to the Russians, sending it to the Chinese, sending it to what was very prominent, I believe, around the time when this was published, was ISIS, which is obviously a terrorist organization, obviously, not just in the fictional sense, but also in a very real sense. So again, this was kind of close to home in terms of how modern this really is. I think this was published, I think there should be a year of when this was published somewhere in there. This was, again, very recent, if I'm not too crazy. Yeah, so 2016. So that's very recent. It's like 10-ish years ago. Still kind of recent. So again, data breach goes to all these people, and then all of these high-profile people, Army, Navy, what have you, are getting targeted by these terrorists. And in the midst of all that, you have Jack Ryan is still the president. You have his son as part of the campus, which is just this high military organization that's within the U.S. Army that does all these covert operations. So his son is in the campus and being trained in the campus. And it goes into that aspect of Jack Ryan Jr. training, becoming more of a field operative for the United States. And then it also jumps back to Jack Ryan as the president, doing the presidential things, trying to keep the country together, but also trying to, how do I put this? Keep the globe together, like do the best interest for the national security is what I'm trying to say. So it does a really good job of this one. This one was just really good. I liked this one more than the Point of Contact one. I wasn't really a fan of the Point of Contact one. This one I was a huge fan of, but it was just a long read. I think that would be the only bad thing about it. This one is just a really, really long, drawn out story. So you have to be willing to read the story. And I can understand why it's long. There's a lot going on. There's all these types of people, all these other bad people, and then you have the bad guys kind of turn on each other. So the Chinese and the Russians and the Middle Eastern guys are always trying to turn on each other and try to take credit for killing the most people with the data breach or whatever. And obviously this comes to a head towards the very end when they finally catch the person who caused all data breach, which is someone that I would never imagine that they would do it, but they find the person who does the data breach and then bring him to justice in the most amazing Tom Clancy fashion, which is just kind of leaving him out in the middle of nowhere and letting nature take its course in that way. The bad, again, is just a long book. You got to be committed for these longer ones. This is not the longest book I've read, but it's long. So that would be the bad thing. The good thing is I loved the plot and I loved the characters. I loved how this was different from the Point of Contact book. I loved how this one played into all of the enemies that are normally found in the post-Tom Clancy era. So I mentioned when I was talking about Point of Contact how the enemy is always either from a Middle Eastern country or a Russian country. No, this one had enemies from every country. So China, Russia, the Middle East, Bosnia, all these other random places. And with that, you don't really necessarily know, as you're reading this book, you don't necessarily know where the main villain comes from until the very end. And it's such a good, amazing action sequence. I loved all the action sequences, and this kind of reminded me of Skyfall from James Bond and Home Alone. Just these massive, cool house gunfights, which are really, really amazing. The ugly for this part is not just the length, but there are times where I feel like there were too many enemies mentioned. So and there's a lot of emphasis on the politics. So there's a lot of emphasis on the geopolitics of the data breaches and all this other stuff. So if you're not into that stuff, I can see why this would drag it down. The sequences where it's all actiony and the sleuthing and figuring out the enemy, that part was good, but a lot of the other stuff was just some of the nitty-gritty politics stuff and the military stuff can kind of bring it down if you're not into this stuff. Again, it's Tom Clancy, so there's supposed to be a lot of military stuff, but sometimes when he has other people write it can be even more bogged down. Would I read this one again? Probably, if I had the time. I don't always have the time to sink my brain into a 750-page book. This one I gave 4 stars. It was generally a good story. I liked it more than the Point of Contact one. And I really, really think that this one is probably one of the best newer Tom Clancy ones I've read in a while. And I hope to read more of these newer Tom Clancy ones soon. Maybe. And I thought that I would leave it off with something a little different. So we talked about Dean Koontz and we talked about True Faith and Allegiance. But what am I going to be reading next? Well, as it turns out, I have the book that I'm reading right now, which is called To the Bright Edge of the World by Eowyn Ivey. As you can see, I've already kind of started it. I'm on page 48. It's a historical fiction novel. I'm not going to get too much into it, but from what I've read by reviews and what I've read so far, I'm kind of on the fence about it, but this is going to be one of the books that I'm going to talk about in the next video when we do this at the end of the month again. So it's going to be To the Bright Edge of the World and then whatever else I decide to read And wow, we went around for a very long time. So I want to thank you all so much for watching. If you liked what you saw, please remember to leave a like, comment, subscribe, share wherever you watch your videos, and I will be back at the end of May. It's a long time. I'll be back at the end of May to go over To the Bright Edge of the World, what I thought about it, what I got out of it, and then any other books that I'm going to be reading. There's a few others that are up and coming. I'm not going to say what they are because I want to leave enough content for the next video. And as always, thank you all so much for watching. If you made it through the end, you definitely deserve a cookie or something. Good job. Thank you all so much again, and I will see you all in the next video at the end of the month. Happy reading.